Today I'm going to be sharing with you some of my favorite garden design tips to help you get your dream garden. I actually have so many of these tips that I'm going to be breaking this video into a part 1 and a part 2. If you want all of the tips right now, just go to the description of this video. I'm going to leave a link to a PDF where you can view them all. Otherwise, just stay tuned for part 2 of this video. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel so that you get that one too. And let's get right into it. My first garden design tip is to repeat plants and or colors in your landscape. The biggest frustration that I hear from homeowners is that their garden doesn't feel put together, it doesn't feel unified, or it doesn't really flow. And this is a really easy thing to change. All you need to do is purchase more of the same plant and repeat them throughout your garden. Another way to create that unified look is to use the same color throughout your garden. So you don't have to necessarily do groupings of the same plants, but groupings of similar plants with the same color throughout your garden to create that unity and flow is a really easy thing that you can try at home to make your garden feel more put together and more unified and like it all is one space instead of separate areas. Garden design tip number 2 is to arrange plants in groupings or masses. When you buy 3, 5, or 7 of the same plant and you group them together, you can really create that mixed border or layered look in your landscape, especially by intermingling them with other groupings of plants. This is a really simple way to create more unity and flow in your garden and just get that designerly look that you may be going for. I know it sometimes feels boring to keep repeating the plant over and over again, but trust me, this really works. Designers do it all the time. My next garden design tip is to hide different spaces of your garden from view. This does 3 really cool things when you try it at home. First, it creates a sense of curiosity and wonder in your garden. Because you can't see the whole thing at one time, it makes people wonder what's around the corner. It also gets them out and exploring your space to see what else is out there. The second thing that it does is it actually makes your space feel larger. Because we can't visually see from the front of the space to the back of the space, our minds think that the space is a lot larger than it actually is. So just by creating a curved pathway or something obstructing the rest of a path so that somebody has to kind of wander through it to see the end actually makes your space feel a lot larger and a lot more magical. The third thing that it does is creates more privacy in your space. So when you're blocking different areas from view, you're immediately creating garden rooms in your space that feel cozier and a lot more private than it would be if your yard was completely open and you just had plants around all of the edges of your landscape. So don't overlook the idea of hiding pieces of the garden from view. It's a really great trick. My next garden design tip is to connect your spaces with paths. You can lay out your garden spaces and design pathways that connect them together. 2 common approaches I use are circuit pathways and hub and spoke pathways. And I don't know if these are the actual names of them, that's just what I call them. But in a circuit pathway, you would travel around the garden in one single path from start to finish, kind of like I'm doing right now, where you have to follow this exact path to get through my garden. The second way is called a hub and spoke, where there's a center area and then there's pathways leading from that center area to every area of the garden. An example of that would be being able to enter over here, and then right here there's actually another pathway to enter the area where there's a seating area, and then another pathway to enter over here. So that is a central area and then different pathways connecting that central area to the different rooms or spaces in your landscape. Both are really great to use. There's no one that's better than the other. It just depends on the design and depends on your own needs and your own tastes. My next garden design tip is to create focal points throughout your landscape to give the viewer of the garden a place for their eyes to rest upon or actually go to in your landscape. Here right behind me you can see I have an arbor. That's a beautiful focal point. Also right next to me I have a beautiful bird bath, so you can have multiple focal points in the same space. I usually have one that's a main focal point like the arbor and then another smaller focal point. You can use all sorts of things. It doesn't have to be a bird bath or an arbor. You can use benches, pieces of art, containers, water features, even a brightly colored plant in an opposite color of the rest of the colors in your garden can create a nice little focal point. So the sky is really the limit when it comes to focal points. And there's so many ways to do this that aren't even permanent in your garden. So if you're renting or you're not quite sure, you can always just plop a container down somewhere, see how that feels to you before you buy something more permanent. Lots of ways to do this in your garden, and it's a really fun way to add more personality and just an element of surprise. My next tip is to do plant research before you actually purchase plants for your garden. And I know it's super tempting to just run out to the garden center and buy the first pretty plant you see, but as a designer, I do a lot of upfront research into the conditions of someone's property before I'm actually choosing plants for them. It's a little bit tedious, but it can be fun. I've grown to love the plant research process and just looking online and seeing what plants are available to me. Something that you can do that's really simple at home is just to take a walk around your neighborhood at different times of year and make note of the plants that are growing in other people's yards. You can use a plant identification app if you're not sure, or you can just ask the homeowner if they're outside. It's a great way to make friends. They may even give you some divisions of that plant. But typically what I've found is that your neighbors are going to have really similar conditions that you do. Minus sun and shade. They may have a shady garden where you have a sunny one, but typically the soil conditions are really similar. So if they're having success growing a plant, odds are you're going to have success growing that plant too. So if you just stay local, walk around and pick out plants in different seasons that your neighbors are growing that you really like, you're going to have a beautiful garden that looks great in every single season without having to go on the internet to do tons of research. My next tip is to choose a color palette for your garden. And I know there's lots of people that have differing opinions on using a color palette or just going absolutely crazy with color. It's completely okay if you don't want to do this. Just speaking as a designer here, and a designer tip is to use a color palette. I always use a color palette. I don't always use the same color palette for every garden I design, but it is something that really, really helps me. First of all, color can evoke different types of moods in people. So you can actually start to research the different colors and their meanings and what they make people feel like, and use that to create the mood that you want in your garden. The other thing that it does is it really kind of skips all of the color theory and the nuances of combining plants and combining colors together. Because you know you're going to use pink, purple, and white plants, it makes it a lot simpler to actually choose those plants. It refines that list of plants down quite a bit, so it's not as daunting. And it also makes it so that your entire garden will look good together, instead of having areas that have certain colors and other areas that have different colors. If you don't want to use a color palette, it's just a suggestion. I always choose one, and I think it's a really great tip because it helps you to master a lot of design principles that you don't even know you're mastering because of that color palette. It's definitely a great thing to try to bring your garden together, make it feel more unified, and make it feel more peaceful and calm or exciting and energizing, depending on the colors that you choose. So that's it for part 1 of my garden design tips. Remember, in the description below, I'm going to have a PDF where you can view all of the tips right now. I'll email them right to you, and make sure you're subscribed so that you get notified when I put out part 2 of this video. I'll see you over in that one.